Welcome, engineers. We're live on Friday, April 2nd. We're here after the conclusion of Cisco Live. The conclusion was a couple of days ago. We talked about Cisco Live yesterday. And so today then, if Cisco Live is over and we don't have any more lectures or event stuff to talk about, what are we going to talk about? This is a certificate or a cert, cybersecurity cert, networking cert discussion section with 10 minutes every day. So what are we doing today? Well, in honor of Cisco, I thought we'd talk about their flagship. I thought we would talk about their flagship Ccna. And so I wanted to talk a little bit about the Ccna because the Ccna's changed. And so we can just have a quick live discussion on what's going on with the Ccna, right? So the Ccna changed from 1 exam to 2, which I thought was pretty cool. It wasn't, I would say cool, interesting. How about that? It was 1 exam when I took it many years ago in 2008, or the initial cert that I got in 2008. It then split into 2 exams. You may remember this. It was Interconnecting Network Devices 1 and Interconnecting Network Devices 2, ICND 1 and ICND 2. And they introduced what was known as the Cisco Certified Entry-Level Networking Technician, the CCENT. And they have subsequently done away with those certs, the intermediate certification and those 2 certs, and gone back to 1 certifying exam. They've updated the lab infrastructure, they've updated the question pool, and they've changed the list of topics, right? And so I thought I would talk just a little bit about the change in the list of topics and kind of how they went about that, as well as what I thought was, some of the major changes and what I thought maybe people have focused a little bit too much on in terms of the change to the Ccna. And so I'm going to start with the last topic from the Ccna list of objectives, which is network programmability. And so every time since the new exam has been released, and I've taught a bunch of Ccna since the new exam has been released, actually just got requested to teach another one, so this is something I do really regularly. Every time I teach a new Ccna, the first thing that someone wants to know about the new Ccna is, when are we going to get to network programmability? Network automation. It might be, if you're newer to this stuff and you're thinking about going the Ccna route, then Cisco Certified Network Associate, you might be saying to yourself, well, that seems pretty intense, the programmability side. And I agree. And Cisco has since rolled out and become, I think, a flagship for network automation and automating configuration and automating solutions. And I think that that's awesome. So they have put an emphasis with their DevNet Associate, their DevNet Professional, all their DevNet track as a developer and automation solution in terms of the network and in terms of automating network infrastructure is great. And so I love what they've done. But in terms of the Ccna objectives, I don't think that personally, even in the amount of content that they've put out related to it, I don't think that it's representative of what you would actually see from a networking associate level exam. And I think that people put too much focus on it, where they go, man, how am I going to know Ansible and Puppet and Chef and JSON and YAML and XML? How am I going to be able to identify these data structures? How am I going to know how to push these data structures out? What the format of Ansible and Ansible playbooks need to be when I'm using them to automate my infrastructure? And that's a really daunting task. And I think that you should not be as worried about it as you are. I think you should, if you were, let's say, studying for Ccna, I would focus on some of the peripherals, some of the associate level information, which is, what does JSON look like versus what does XML look like? And if you did a simple Google search of XML versus JSON, you could go through and go, oh, okay, XML, in my opinion, this is just me, looks a little bit more like HTML, right? It looks a little bit more like web backend stuff. It's just, in my opinion, that's what it looks more like to me. If you right-click inspect your HTML page, I think it's going to look more like XML than it is going to look like JSON. And I think JSON is going to look more like variable definitions in your traditional scripting languages. I'm not saying that it is a scripting language, right? It's an object notation, so it's identifying information, but still, I think JSON is going to look more like variable definitions in Python or JavaScript itself, right? It is JavaScript object notation, or maybe even C or something like this. But anyway, That's just my my friendly piece of advice is not to worry so much about the DevNet side, the programmability side, the automation side of the CCNA. Although they did add it, and there are components there that were never there in any of the previous iterations of CCNA, I think people freak out way too much about it. I will touch briefly on the other 4 or 5 components of their basic topics, which is networking fundamentals, which is critical. Also, I like to take like kind of a cybersecurity focus here, but networking is critical. If you ever follow Cybersec Twitter, or you follow InfoSec Twitter, or you follow Forensics Investigation Twitter, or Hacking Twitter, any of these, IT Twitters, right, that are focused on cybersecurity or networking, all of them you'll see every single one of those guys, myself included, or gals, will post networking fundamentals is critical to X. Networking fundamentals is critical to investigation and response. Networking fundamentals is critical to blue team, is critical to red team. So by the way, network fundamentals is actually a really critical component of this. And so I think that CCNA is actually a great way to get that networking fundamental knowledge. A Network Plus is something that's useful too, but in the context of CCNA, I really like it this way. And I like that the CCNA is vendor specific, so you can actually learn in the context of the CLI. You'll notice that the CLI is the next component down, right? And so the CLI is Cisco's command line interface in the context of the CCNA. Right? And so you have the opportunity with a CCNA to learn the actual commands to make the configurations, to make network changes, to configure dynamic routing protocols, to enter privileged exec or interface subconfigs or VLAN subconfigs, and how you actually get there, as opposed to, let's say, a vendor neutral certification, which you don't always get the opportunity to do from a command line perspective. You might get the opportunity to use some GUIs or representative GUIs or open source GUIs or things like this, but you don't actually get to go privilege exec to other CLI reference points. You don't get that distinct reference point that you get from a CCNA. And so I really like that about the cert as well, if this is the route that you're going. And I think that it's extremely useful, again, from a networking perspective, but also from a cybersecurity perspective. And that leads me to the third topic on our rundown, which is CML. That's Cisco's modeling labs. I'm going to be doing some demos in Cisco modeling labs, and it is amazing as a network infrastructure tool. You might say, Travis, what about GNS3 or some other utility? I agree, they are useful as well, but I like Cisco modeling labs. And since we are in a Cisco week here, let's say, I do run CML on a Dell powered server in my infrastructure, and I really like it. Also, it has added some functionality. It has some added functionality over, let's say, an emulation tool like Packet Tracer. That being said, I included CML just for the cleanliness of the rundown. I actually think that if you're going the CCNA route, that CML is more functionality than you would need. And so if you don't need as much functionality as CML would give you, and you don't want to pay $200 for the license, or you don't want to try and rent time on, or try and get some free time on Cisco's developer studios for their CML servers, then what you should probably do is use their free utility, which is Packet Tracer. And you hear a lot of people use Packet Tracer for their CCNA study. It's a great utility. It's a solid little or medium-sized emulation tool where you can build switched, routed, and host endpoint networks very simply, and it supports almost all of the functionality you will need. Travis, what functionality doesn't it support? It doesn't support some layer 3 switching functionality. It doesn't support a lot of the IPv6 stuff, and where I'm an IPv6 also an IPv6 instructor, I get frustrated with the lack of IPv6 support in Packet Tracer, whereas CML supports all that stuff. So it's one of those things where if you're intending to go CCNA, CCNP, or CCNA, and more advanced routing and more advanced cybersecurity infrastructure, certification routes, or let's say professional routes, then CML would be a much better benefit to you. If you're planning on just taking a CCNA and then using it as a springboard to go network infrastructure and get a job and do these things, I would say Packet Tracer and understanding Packet Tracer is probably the most beneficial to you. Just spin it up, start messing around in the CLI. If you break things, just blow it away and start again. We have 10 seconds left. COD, that's a joke. That was Call of Duty. I just had CCNA, CLI, CML, and I thought I'd include another one for that fourth line. I didn't have one. Okay, we have 1 second left. We're going to start next week. See you on next Monday.